Good morning, and thank you for being here on a Saturday morning. I would myself not show up for my own plenary if on a Saturday morning at 8. These are my conflicts of interest. So, this is going to be a potpourri talk. Don't expect too much evidence in it. It's probably lots of pictures from the internet, and I will run through it. Call this a Tiffin sampler where you have little bits of a lot of things so that you understand where things go. The first thing, of course, is does insulin have a future? And this is the picture that from the commerce industry that talks about what are the possible avenues of investment for investors, but it gives you a good idea of where things are. Here you will see these are the ones that are going to phase 3 studies, these are the phase 2, and these are the phase 1 studies. What you will notice is there are a lot of Me Too molecules in the whole picture, right? What you don't have is anything out of the box. So you have dual agonists, you have some of these that will probably not make it to the market, and you of course have a bunch of insulins, especially you'll see the Novo ones. One of them is a long-acting insulin that's probably now moved into phase 2 already, a once-a-week insulin. Other than that, you don't have anything that's going to displace insulin in the next 10 years. So that's really what you have, and so therefore insulin definitely has a future. So I'm going to divide this talk into 5 parts, and this will be 1, how can we use insulin better? 2nd, change in the delivery of insulin, which most people have an issue with. For people in this part of the world, where when you step out 7 in the morning, it's already scorching, how can we improve the stability of insulin? Then we're going to run out of insulin for the whole world, and so how can we improve the cost and the access? And lastly, I'll talk about smart insulins, right? What about better use? I think the first thing is, if you search for insulin and, diabetes and artificial intelligence, you're going to find tons and tons of articles. My sister who works for Akamai tells me that the word artificial intelligence is the most abused word on the planet today. And if you review all these articles, you would find most of these are basically not artificial intelligence, but algorithms repackaged. But most of the artificial intelligence algorithms are right now in pixel areas like diabetic retinopathy. But what you will see increasingly is that artificial intelligence and deep machine learning algorithms improve the way that we take care of diabetes. Importantly, and I'll show you in a minute, that they will help us understand the use of insulin much better and actually help our patients use lesser insulin, more better timed insulin, use it in the right time and right place. This is a variant of an insulin pump that has just been approved in the UK. It's been available in the US for a while, but it is a closed loop pump, which basically helps this patient adjust, the pump adjusts itself, uses an algorithm, suspends it when you have hypoglycemia, pretty much closes the insulin loop. I don't want to get into pumps today. Pumps are, I'm sure you've had a talk on pumps in this very, very particular conference, just to tell you that pumps have gone to a point where they do not need human interference so much, and in fact the AI does it much better. There is another movement on the side to get smart pens. And this is probably something that is going to have greater uptake in the community because pumps at this point of time are horrendously expensive in the world. Open access can be used with an Android or an iPhone. It's made out of just small components. Technology is very cheap. And this connects to a pen. It tells you, for example, if you're trying to redose again in the same day, take a second dose. It warns you that, you know what, you shouldn't be taking your insulin again. It sends and it can be monitored by your diabetes educator, and she can actually call you, or a text comes in saying you haven't taken your insulin today. So this, I think, is the biggest delivery thing that's happening. And it's going to be launched in India. I'm sure it's going to come to Sri Lanka very soon. But this is something big. And I've just put in one manufacturer. I can tell you that from being the domain of big pharma, the new insulin market is the domain of startups. There are so many startups in this. I wish I had enough money to put in them. This again is available for inpatients where we have been struggling with sliding scales and bad insulin usage, unavailable doctors for many, many years. This is something called Endo tool. This is made by Monarch, and what it does is it sort of has already shown data that it reduces hypoglycemia in the inpatient setting where it allows these algorithms to be used. So just giving you a sample of how through the use of technology, at least in the future, and somewhat even starting now, insulin is being used better. And I can tell you these are only going to get better and better. And soon, most of us will actually be able to sit in a conference without looking at our phones, right? So the first thing was better use. Let's talk about delivery. Way insulin is delivered, people have always had a needle phobia, where you shouldn't because it doesn't hurt, these needles are ultra fine, but we still have this block a bit about needles. And that is why in our world, insulin is a threat and not a promise. It should be a promise, but people treat it as a threat. That includes physicians. If you don't do this, you will have insulin. If you don't do this, you're going to have insulin. So why? Because of the delivery. This is the state of oral insulin. There are many, many studies going on, one from India, of course. The problem has always been with oral insulin or the inhaled insulins is that since Medicare doesn't pay for it because it doesn't provide an advantage, its commercialization has always been a problem. What does oral insulin do? It's good as a short-acting insulin, works at the level of the liver. People are looking at indications for it in NASH, but other than that, you're not going to see big developments in oral insulin unless some of the technology that we talk about comes in. Inhaled insulin has been around for a while. This is again one of those things that we thought was a blockbuster. Initially came in the early 2000s, like Exubera, signals about the excipient, having cancer, decreased lung function, repackaged as a smaller device in the 2000s, was taken up by, of course, Sanofi, and then Sanofi exited. Inhaled insulin is in a limbo. So about buccal insulin. So these alternate deliveries have pretty much not found commercialization. Remember, it's not just the science. Ultimately, to get a product, the commerce matters. And it's a commerce that's preventing these from coming into the market. This is something very interesting. I found this in the NIH director's blog. And if the director of NIH thinks that this is great, I think it should come in. So someone actually saw this tortoise. The beauty of this tortoise, which is an African leopard tortoise, the leopard because of all these colors, is that if you flip it over, it actually writes itself in no time. So someone actually thought, let me use this to deliver insulin right to the stomach. So what they did was, they packaged insulin in these small microcapsules. Let me show this, it's very interesting. So this microcapsule has, I'll show you this and then come back, basically has insulin stored here, right? And if sugar is present, it actually releases the insulin and into the gastric mucosa. So the capsule is dissolved. These small little sugar packets, these small little tortoises, if you want to call them, come in. Sugar triggers it. The insulin is injected, and of course, I think it sort of, the rest of it goes into your feces. So this is really what's happening, and this is edible microinsulin. Seems to be one of the very interesting things that is going on. So I talked about better use, I talked about delivery, I talked about stability. What about transdermal preparations? I will talk about those when I talk about smart insulin. I think that's the next part that we go. This is something even more important for us for two reasons. One, temperature. The second, of course, is more and more we start using pumps. The more and more we need reservoirs that are temperature proof. So remember, this is the insulin hexamer. I'm sorry. Let me come back to this. So one of the things that people have tried to do is, how do you stabilize insulin? One approach has been that you fuse the alpha and the beta chains, remove some of the glycine molecules, and voila, you get an insulin that is ultra stable. That you don't have to throw away 28 days, that you don't have to plonk into a refrigerator, that you can carry wherever you go, whether you're in sub-Saharan Africa or trekking the deep jungles of Jaffna. This is what you get. Again, Only 2 companies are looking at this, one in 2018, very early trials. But I think this will be a reality, not simply because poorer countries need it, but pump manufacturers need it. So ultrastable insulin analogs are on the way in. That brings us to cost and access. This is something very important for most of us. There was a death in the United States because of lack of insulin. This is something that we would never think about sitting in this corner of the world. But the thing is that insulin supply will not be enough to treat growing number of diabetes patients in 2030. The people who will be requiring, and this is from Sanjay Basu et al., and this is from the Lancet, people requiring insulin will be around 79 to 80 million. Remember, these numbers are usually an underestimate. And the people with access to insulin will be about 38 million. How are these going to change? The first thing is, of course, what's already there, which is a biosimilar market. The biosimilar and the biologic markets are going to be the largest ever markets in the world, outpacing the innovators. What are biosimilars? I don't know how many of you remember that originally IBM had this big monopoly on computers. And then they outsourced it to Malaysia to build the computers. Then one smart man said, you know what, why don't I open up this computer, looked at its parts, and just rebuilt it, right? And what are biosimilars? Did exactly this. They looked at the innovator, they looked at the product, they deconstructed it, and they said, can I build a similar insulin? People were skeptical, especially the US FDA. There was a huge hue and cry about getting biosimilars into the market. And there were lots of regulations, but I think biosimilars have made it. And it was originally with filgrastim, then with erythropoietin, but today insulin is just getting there. And as countries realize the value of insulin and its access, you're finding biosimilars getting each and there. How do you know if a biosimilar is good as the original? Remember, there were problems before. Marvel insulin is a great example. But how do you know they are important? The simplest way is to ask them to show you the PK and PD. If the PK and the PD match the original innovator, you have a very good insulin. And there are at least 20 manufacturers looking at insulin. Even in Sri Lanka now you have 2 Indian manufacturers who are bringing in biosimilars. You're going to see this going up and up. You're going to see the costs coming down, and you're going to see competition. So this is very important. But I like these guys. So you have DIY insulin, and people like me who love the DIY culture, the open access guys, the guys who like to tinker. I was one of the, 10 years ago, the fun was cracking the iPhone. And if that gets to you, you could actually, just like you do your single malt at home, you could get your own insulin at home. So here's this little kit. It's available online for those of you who want to make insulin, right? You can engineer it. So they have a bunch of stuff to put in the organisms. Remember, it's just microorganism. It's like making curd, right? You take milk, you put in the right kind of bacteria, it grows, you harvest it. Then you grow it, you clean it. And of course, remember, this technology is the same, that is a little much better than what Banting and Best did. So you could do this. So for those who do not have access, or those who don't trust the government, or those who don't trust big corporations, grow insulin at home. It's like the cannabis culture. The other big thing is, of course, in access, is open access insulin. Heard of this? So what's happening is, you have pumps, and which connect to their own sensors, which connect to their own devices, which basically means that they're bleeding you to death, right? The only thing that changes in each pump is actually the software, but you have no way of upgrading the software. So you have open access. Now, it is when people challenge and put big corporations on the map when progress occurs. So now you can download upgrades on some of these pumps. But this is very interesting because you could choose your own pump, you could use your own pad and your own device, and you can mix and match these. So you'll find more of these coming in. See, this is a direct output of empowering patients. The DSME movement that occurred in diabetes a decade ago changed us from being paternalistic physicians to physicians who share information and help our patients. Similarly, this is a technological revolution that is occurring that can only be good. Yes, you will have fringes and outliers. You're going to find newspapers saying that, oh, somebody grew insulin in their thing and had an anaphylactic reaction. It's going to happen. But what is this doing is putting pressure on large corporations and government that they need to start doing things right, or people will take things in their own hands. So that's what's happening. So I talked about better use, delivery, stability, cost and access. Let's talk about smart. So the thing is that the reason insulin gets a bad rap is at the end of it, insulin can overdo its work, cause hyperglycemia. What you really want is an insulin that behaves like the one in your body. It delivers when you need it, shuts it off when you need it. So how do you do that? To do that, what you need is you need to have inactivated insulin in the body that's activated by glucose and shuts itself off when glucose is not present. Right? Activated insulin, glucose present, increases and shuts itself off. How can you do that? Several ways. The simplest is using things that work that are responsive to glucose. Three things respond to glucose. One is convalvin A, which is a glucose binding protein. Glucose oxidase, which we use in measuring glucose. All of you know about glucose oxidase in measurements. And lastly, of course, phenyl boronic acid, which is a chemical that responds to glucose. And then you need something to release insulin. It could be matrix, it could be glucose binding competition. Very interesting stuff. And then you need a way of releasing it into the body through a pore, through a microneedle, many of these. So let's look at this. This is phenyl boronic acid when it is ionized, and then when monosaccharides are attached to it, it actually releases insulin. So this is from PNAS 2015, and there are some updates on this, but what it tells you is, and those of you preparing for the exam, please by heart this slide now, but the important thing for you to remember is that the phenyl boronic acid is here, and when it gets released in the presence of glucose, insulin is released into the system. So this is how it works. Just for you, it works. And then you can impregnate it in many ways. One is you could use the insulin and put it in with glucose oxidase or even phenyl boronic acid into a microneedle. When glucose is present, oxidation takes place, insulin is released. This is the microneedle. This is what is called a smart insulin array patch. The insulin is present here and gets released by the thing. Another way of doing it is to sort of put insulin into a mesh. The mesh sort of swells when glucose is present, and then the insulin particles that are trapped here get released. You could use it as a gel where you put it on an outer wall, and then the gel sort of releases the insulin. What I found was more fascinating is this one. I didn't know this. I was reading, I was sitting when my daughter was reading science, and somewhere she was reading that hemoglobin, the RBC molecule does not have its own mitochondria or any mechanism to make energy. Why? Because the power of the heart propels it to where it needs, and it's very useful because the only thing it does is it carries hemoglobin, makes it oxyhemoglobin, and then lets it go. So some smart guy who knew more science than I do actually did something. So he modified the insulin, had it attached to the RBC, and makes it release when it's hyperglycemic. Smart. I think this is just amazing. That you tag it to RBC, which goes everywhere, and gets insulin released. Concept, people are working on it. Let's see what happens. So what is the place of all these smart insulins? Many of these will shut down because they are from startups. Some of these have been acquired by big pharma, and they are moving with us. You've seen some phase 1 trials, preclinical trials. I know of at least a couple of phase 2 that are going on. So the next 10 years, you're going to see some of these really present. Right? Some of them, of course, will be footnotes in history that we can go back and say, oh, they thought of this. This is my favorite one. I don't have this thing, but remember that insulin is like this, and it folds 4 times to make a protein, right? And when the receptor receives it, insulin goes and sits on it, right? Now, when insulin sits on it, then actions occur beyond the receptor, and its actions takes place. Now, what if you were to create an insulin molecule that reveals or the receptor molecule that reveals itself only when there is glucose? Remember, you need a particular attachment point, and because it's a 4-point, let's say in the absence of glucose, this is what happens. In the presence of glucose, this unfolds. This is called a conformational switch. So you could actually create an insulin molecule that unfolds itself on the receptor and cause receptor actions only if there is a conformational switch. That's very interesting. Again, very early, but this is something that I think makes a lot of sense. It just does its work when glucose is present. All right? Moving on, this is something that people have talked about, big name here, where you could actually have synthetic beta cell spheres with insulin that are delivered and released when glucose is present. What is probably going to be Big Pharma's response is this one. There's a big movement on unimolecular polypharmacy, which means the same molecule has more than one event. For example, this has glucagon, GLP-1 and GIP. And these are already coming into the market. I just met with someone in the ADA, a guy who has a library of these molecules, and he says that they have reworked the insulin molecule to just have 27 amino acids, still do its work, and have a GLP-1 insulin combination in the same molecule. I'm sorry, the picture of it is not there, but this is what it is. So you're going to see some of these where GLP-1s are combined with insulin in the same molecule, and maybe even glucagon, because that's something that you want happening. Fascinating. Watch this space. What about for those with type 1 diabetes? I think this is where we have to talk about. Big talk about stem cells, but what is interesting is that wherever you put it, if you're able to make beta cells either through stem cells or any other way, the most important part is to protect it. Why do you protect it? Because the body's immune system is going to destroy it. So here is an interesting way. This is a semi-permeable membrane. You put in the hormones, it keeps away the immune cells, lets glucose go inside, and once it goes inside, insulin is released. This is called teabagging. There have been people who've been trying to implant beta cells under the kidney capsule, but this is a great way. This is called the encapsular drug delivery system, where there's a semi-permeable membrane. It doesn't allow the proteins inside, protects the beta cell. Let's do it. I'm going to save the best for the last. This is Talchai et al., published in Nature Genetics in 2012, and I've seen subsequent this thing. Is can you coax our own body to make insulin? The work that I do in diabetes is on a molecule called FOXO. I work on FOXO knockouts, and my big interest is the circadian rhythm and FOXO. So if you knock out FOXO in the intestine, it converts the intestinal cells into insulin-producing cells, and these are glucose responsive. So I'm thinking of someone sitting in Shanghai with a CRISPR technology, editing out a few cells and knocking out FOXO in a few intestinal cells. Can it happen? Probably. Or do an siRNA knockout. We don't know if this is going to get commercialized, but if it happens, it's fun. So I've given a glimpse into the future of insulin. And some of it, sounds like fairy tales, but the important thing to remember, the beauty about the future is that it becomes the present very quickly, right? And that's really the beauty of the future. The most important thing is all of this contributes to our mission of helping patients, empowering them, making sure that they come into and all this technology. Many of us are afraid of technology. In the right hands and learning how to use them is probably a mission for physicians. many of this will require us to relearn our tools and actually hand over control to our patients. And this is something that we need to learn very, very quickly and adapt. The future of insulin also is intricately linked to our own future as well as our patients. But it doesn't take away our mission to be there for our patients when they need them. Thank you for your patience. I'm so happy to see so many of you in the morning. Have a nice day. Thank you.